Okay, so this is going to be the second one tutorial, the one for Wednesday. This is going to be taking a photo and making it into a watercolor like painting in Photoshop. Now, Photoshop has a filter built in that will do it. It automatically thinks it looks like a watercolor, and I want to show you that first to show you how really bad it is. So I'm going to come to Filter. I'm going to come to Filter Gallery, and you'll see I have texture open right now. I'm going to close that. I'm going to come up to Artistic up here, and I'm going to open that, and I'm going to come down here to Watercolor. And you'll see right off the bat, it's pretty awful. You can change the brush detail to awful. You can change it up this way to awful. You put it back somewhere in the middle, back to awful. Shadow intensity goes from awful to awful. And texture goes from awful to even more awful. So we're not going to go with that. That's, as you might guess, awful. I'm going to close that. This tutorial is going to go into a lot of things we haven't covered, and I'm going to do my best, as I said in the last one, I'm going to do my best to stop every so often, let you all look through, give you a chance to stop the video, and try and follow along. You may want to watch through the video first, and maybe take notes, and then keep it and be ready to go as you go through and try it yourself. I did find this tutorial myself off of a YouTube video from a channel called Blue Lightning TV. However, he did this entire thing in 4 minutes, which was difficult for me to catch up with, and I'm still comfortable with it, so we're going to go a little bit slower. Now, first thing we're going to do is we're going to unlock this layer. However, we're going to name it while we do it this time. So I'm going to double click, and instead of just clicking OK, I'm going to come over here to name. I'm going to type this as base, and I'm going to click OK, and that renames it automatically. What I need to do now is I actually need to duplicate it. So when I duplicate it, I could control click on it and click duplicate layer. I could come up to layer and duplicate layer. Or, as you know, I like to do shortcuts. I can push the command button and the J button, and it'll automatically duplicate a layer for me. Now I'm going to double click on the name, not off to the right. I'm going to click on the name itself, and I'm going to call this blur. Okay. Give you a second to catch up. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to blur this layer. So with making sure I have my blur layer selected, I'm going to come up to filter, and I'm going to come down to the blur section. And I'm going to come over and I'm going to look for smart blur. It's down here towards the bottom. And that's going to bring up my little window. Unfortunately, it gives me this little preview to look in to see what I think. And you can do anything around from 8 to 10. You can play with them, see what you think, how it looks. You want to keep your threshold around 30. The radius between 8 and 10. Threshold to 30. Quality high, and mode normal. And what we're looking for is you can just scroll around. You can see the way it renders certain areas. So if I take this down to 8, it's maybe a little less blur. A little more blur, I should say. Less detail. So I'm going to go with that. I'm going to click OK. And this might take the computer a moment. Alright, so you can kind of see where we're going right off the bat. If you look down here in the water, we're getting some sort of nice blurs, a little bit less detail. So once you've caught up to that, what we need to do then is we're going to come over to the base layer. We're going to come over to our layers again, and I'm going to select the base layer again. And once again, I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to push Command J, and that's going to give me base copy. I want to grab base copy and I want to drag it to the top. Now you see this little white line that appeared? That tells me I'm at the top. If I come down here below, it'll see the white line appears on below it. I want to grab it to the top and I want to drag it up there. And you'll see now I have base copy at the top. So I want to rename this, and I'm going to name it pencil lines. Alright? Once you've caught up with pencil lines, we need to do a few things. We're going to come back up to our filters menu. We're going to come down to our filter gallery. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to close up that. I'm looking for stylize. I'm going to open stylize, and I'm going to click glowing edges. Now with glowing edges, what I want you to do is I want you to look for over here, and we're going to look for an edge width of 1, an edge brightness of 12, and an edge smoothness of 15. So once you have those, you're going to click OK. and you'll see our layer has changed to this. So we need to do a few more things to this. We need to invert it. And what invert it means is anything that's white will turn to black, anything that's black will turn to white, anything that's red will turn to the opposite of red, which is my bright green, excuse me. Blue will turn to orange, purples will turn to yellow, yellows will turn to purple, everything like that. So the way we can do that is we can go to Image, Adjustments, Invert, or you'll see there's a shortcut of Command-I, Control-I on a PC. So that's got us here. Now we need to desaturate it, meaning we need to take it completely to black and white. Again, I can go up to Image, I can come to Adjustments, I can come down to Desaturate. You'll see there's a keyboard shortcut of Shift, Command, U. So now it's to black and white. So from there, give me a second to catch up. Once you get to that point, we're going to want to make sure we still have pencil lines selected. We're going to come up to these two here. See where it says normal and there's two little arrows? We're going to click on that and we're going to bring it down to multiply. And our opacity right now is at 100%. We can need it to go to 80%. You can either click and drag this little slider, or you can highlight it and just change it to 80. Okay? So our next is we're going to have to duplicate layer again. We're going to click our blur layer, and I'm going to duplicate it again. Now I'm going to do it by pushing Command J, and you'll see I get blur copy. And what I need to do is I'm going to change the name of this, and I'm going to change it to brush. Naming on this particular one is really important because everything gets done with totally different techniques. There's different layer blends, there's blend modes, filters. So we want to make sure we name everyone on this one. So now that I've got it called brush, tiny on, I'm going to invert it again, which is Command I. And then I'm going to come up here to my layer mode, or blend mode, and I'm going to come down and I'm going to change it to color dodge, which is about halfway down. And you'll see it magically looks white again. And then we're going to change our, I don't think I have to change my opacity. I'm going to leave my opacity. I'm going to come up to my brush tool and click on the brush tool. Now I'm going to come up here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change, if your brushes will probably look not like that. Your brushes will, by default, probably look like small thumbnail. Something like this. What you want to do is you want to come up to this little gear icon and click it, and we're going to go to small list. And the reason for that is it gives you a picture of the brush, but it also gives you the name. And what we're looking for right off the bat is we're looking for dry brush. I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to scroll down, and here it is. And you'll see there's a lot. There's like dry brush, tip, light, flow. We're looking for just plain old dry brush. And what I want is, you see how tiny my brush is? I'm going to want to take that up to about 140. There's not a right or wrong if you're at 142 or 150, it's fine. Just somewhere up there to where the brush is pretty good size. And I want to change my brush opacity to 10%. Okay? Once I get the brush opacity set, I'm going to come through and I'm just kind of brush willy-nilly across the whole thing. I'm not going to leave big patches of unbrushed area, but if I miss a spot or two, it really doesn't matter at this point. So I'm just going to come through and I'm just, as you can see, I'm being not particular at all. I'm just making sure I get most of it. And I think that's good. Maybe a little bit. No, it didn't matter. Okay, so that's where we are with our dry brush. And that's the basis of it. Now we're going to come back up to our brushes. Give you a second to catch up. We're going to come back up to our brushes. And we're going to come in here. And you're going to come down to the very bottom and you're going to click Wet Media Brushes. And it'll ask if you want to replace your current brushes with the Wet Media Brushes. If you click OK, it's going to get rid of all the brushes that are in there. I'm going to click Append, which means it's just going to add it to the end. So now I'm going to scroll down almost to the bottom. And what we're looking for in here on mine, which I believe will be the same on yours, very next to the last one, is Watercolor Textured Surface, I'm going to click that. Again, I'm going to make my brush 140 pixels, somewhere in there. Did 145, that's fine. I'm going to change my opacity to 20%. I believe on the original one, he changed his opacity to 40. I always find that to be a little too much. Because what you're going to find on this one, this brush, it works very similar to the watercolor, that whenever I go over something twice, it actually builds up and it looks wet. So when I go through this first time, I'm going to cover almost the entire thing. I'm not going to unclick and re-click. I'm going to click once, I'm going to hold it, and I'm going to paint over the whole stinking picture. A lot like I did with the dry brush. So ready? I'm going to click, and I'm going to hold, and I'm just going to paint over the picture. And you can see wherever I brush, if I brush over it again, it doesn't make a difference. That's because I'm continuing to hold and click. When I let go and I click again, it's going to start building the darkness of the paintbrush. And I'll show you that here in a second. So I'm just going to make sure I get most of this covered up. Especially the building. This building, by the way, this is a photo of Mabry Mill, which is over towards Roanoke. It's on, if you go over 58 West to the Blue Ridge Parkway, you'll find it up there towards Roanoke. All right, so I unclicked. So what I wanted to say where it builds up is now I'm going to come back in, and if I click again, you see how it kind of builds the color like a watercolor would? And it makes it darker, a little more intense. So when I go back and I'm looking at doing the second clicks, I want to think about how is the darkness going to react, and where am I painting? Does it make sense to paint there? And you can always make marks, and if you don't like them, go back and undo it, which I do a lot on these because, again, if I was watercolor painting more often, I would probably know where it would make sense in terms of watercolor to make these second marks, but I tend to stick in sort of the darker areas. I like a lot of contrast in paintings, so I want to come back in and sort of bring out some of these darkness. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this. If it was just me, and I am perfectly fine with you doing it, I would go through here and paint a lot. Not because it necessarily needs it, just because I become obsessive in trying to figure this out. But anyway, so come through painting a bit. I like building up the texture of the watercolor. I'm going to bring this a little bit darker to make this sort of white band here stick out a little bit more. I'm going to bring that a little bit darker to make the Mabry Mill itself stick out more. Alright, so we'll go with that for now, just because I have to stop somewhere. So once we get that, what we're going to do from here is we're going to select our pencil lines at the top, and you're going to want to write this down. This is a 4-button keyboard shortcut, and I would show you where it is in the menus, but I can't find it. It's got to be there, I think, but I have no idea where it is. So with pencil lines selected, I'm going to push Command, Option, Shift, E. And I'm glad this will show this at the bottom of the screen. What you'll see is what it did is it created a new layer up here called Layer 1. And what it did is it took all these layers together and created one layer that's a combination of all of them. So if I were to turn all these off, you couldn't see them now. So basically what we built in all these different layers becomes one layer up here. And the reason we want to do that is we're going to do two things now. We're going to come up to our adjustment layers that we were playing with the other day. And we're going to come to this top row, far right. We're going to go to one called Vibrance. I'm going to click that. And we're going to take the top slider, which is Vibrance, and we're going to take it all the way to the right up to 100. And what Vibrance does is it takes any color that's not saturated and it makes it saturated. So if you have a painting like we had here and there's bright, intense saturated blues and then there's bright, intense saturated reds, but all the other colors are kind of muted, Vibrance will leave the really saturated colors alone, but it'll punch up all the ones that aren't punched up to begin with. So it kind of gives it sort of that painterly look. We're going to do that, and then to sort of finish this up, you can, well, we're going to click on layer 1, and we're going to come up to filter, and we're going to come to filter gallery. However, I want to caution you, avoid this top one that says filter gallery. What that is it's showing you the last filter you used, which means if I click that, it's going to automatically reapply whatever the last filter we used was, and I think that's the pencil lines. So I'm going to make sure I come down here to the filter gallery that's below Convert for Smart Filters. When I do that, it's going to open up again, and I don't want to do glowing edges. I want to get rid of that. I want to open up texture, and I'm going to come over here to texturizer. And what we're doing here is we're looking for sandstone, and scaling can be somewhere around 50%, relief 3 to 4, and top. You can always play with it, bring it up, and you can see it just makes the paper it makes it look like much rougher paper. It's whatever looks good for you. Like I said, I'm going to stick around 50% somewhere in there. And relief will make it look like the actual texture is deeper. It will look really strange if you go too far. So again, 3 to 4, somewhere in there. I like a little bit more intense, so I go to 4. And I'm going to click OK. So there you go. This is the way we make things look like watercolor. Now, do you remember the awful thing we did before where we went to Photoshop and let Photoshop decide what a watercolor should look like? It's terrible. Terrible. So I want you to go ahead and try this. Work through this image. I'm going to give you a link to this image itself. But when you get done with this image, if you get through it, and it took me, 10 minutes, and that's going slow, go online and pick out another image. Just make sure when you do your image search, you do a large one. Play with this with a few of them. Landscapes work really well. You can try them with people. They might not look too bad, but they might look a little wonky. Big pictures of animals will probably be good. Just go ahead and play around. This is one of those techniques that I've never had a use for commercially, but I do enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. So don't get too stressed out if you don't like your results. I'm going to give you this image, so you should be able to get results very similar to mine. But play with anything else and just see how it goes. Eventually, you'll start to figure out when you look at an image, you'll be like, oh, that one's going to work great for watercolor, or that one's probably not going to work out. So have fun with this, and we'll see you next week.